On October 29th, 2022, 158 people were dead and 190 people were hurt. All this happened in 2 hours. This happened on the street that is open space. To the citizens of Seoul, Itaewon is a familiar place. Even to a lot of expats and as well foreign tourists, Itaewon is very familiar place. Now Itaewon became a famous place of tragedy, not only to Koreans, but also to the global community. It was indeed shocking. Ask myself, how come such many people die? How come such a short time and such an open space? Then I began to read and read. The words crowd crush, crowd dynamics, asphyxia, hypoxia, and so on came into my eyes. How are human beings easy to die? How can we not repeat such a disaster anymore? From 10 days ago, I began to make contact with the world's best experts on crowd crush. Dr. Steele said okay. Dr. Bedler, Dr. Nishinari, and finally Dr. Wang said okay with this workshop. In my opinion, experts are to possess both insight and details on the subject. Today's speakers are qualified enough to be a world-class expert in crowd crush. The main reason for the above selection is diversity of expertise and origin. Dr. Steele is a site-oriented expert from England. Dr. Bedler, computer graphic expert from US. Dr. Nishinari, mathematical physicist from Japan. Dr. Wang, MD and PhD from Korea. Now, all of us feel the moral responsibility or obligation of the remnants who have witnessed the outbreak of the Itaewon disaster. As a globally well-recognized experts of crowd safety, all the participants in the workshop share such feelings and try together to make contribution to the prevention of another Itaewon disaster. Its goal, however, is very simple. Although we may fail to dig out all the truth about why and how it happened, we'll still help the government and the civic organizations with the more scientific and systematic investigation. Otherwise, any sort of investigation may be trapped in a state of limbo and become politicized. As in the case of the Itaewon, which saw the casualties of 20 people from other countries, the fatalities from crowd crush will not stop in the national boundary of certain country, but rather rapidly increase beyond due to the globalization and urbanization. In this context, crowd crush is a global issue rather than a domestic one.
So the how and the why are fairly well known in these types of environments. You then need to look at who's responsible, and these are separate. You then need to look at who's responsible, and these are separate issues. But the physics is not too complicated to understand. And I always liken it to a tachometer on a car. You know that if you rev the engine on a car beyond that red line, there's a significant risk that the engine's going to fail. It's the same with crowd density. Once you go beyond that threshold, there's a significant risk of crowd crushing, crowd collapse, progressive crowd collapse, constrictive asphyxia. And it's just understanding what that limit is the way to prevent these incidents from happening in the future. Although this is common knowledge to people that understand crowd dynamics, it is not common knowledge to those individuals that manage these spaces, that plan public environments, simply because they don't have to have any formal education or training. An event organizer doesn't need a qualification. They can just host an event. A city center doesn't have standards for streets, but will have standards for crowded spaces in buildings. So what's missing here is a standard for crowded spaces in general, and density is the critical factor here. What is also missing is a fundamental knowledge of crowd dynamics, of risk that's involved as crowds exceed that safe limit in these spaces. So it's very late here in the UK. The summary that I would put forward to is, this is not a complex problem. This is a simple problem to understand, and there's a simple mechanism to prevent it happening in the future, is define the limits for any environment, no more than X people per square meter, or no more than X people within that area. Thank you.
Each of the shapes represents an individual, and the higher the density, the darker the blue color. So even if we move the wall only a meter, those people who are essentially crushed against the wall are going to sustain very considerable injuries or not survive. And if the walls move 3 meters, which is admittedly quite a bit, a very large percentage of that population of 400 is going to experience some negative effect. And it's based on the ubiquity of cameras. Now, I believe that in the materials you provided us, Dr. Yang, that there was a mention that there were not particularly many, if any, cameras on the Itaewon site. Having cameras presumes that someone's watching the output of the camera, but there are quite robust methods now to do crowd counting passively with computational techniques from a live feed video. And it could be a relatively modest suggestion to mount such cameras in likely congested areas. Of course, that presumes that somebody speculates what those areas are, and that the monitoring is basically closed loop, that there's not a human watching, but one could even imagine a loudspeaker system that says the density in this area has exceeded the standard set by whatever organization, and for your own safety, you should spread out or move to a different area or otherwise take some defensive measures. And I know that there are some corporate interests involved here, and I think that solutions like that, if presented as relatively low cost, but potentially effective ways of reducing the density load in congested areas, might actually be worth some experiments.
Can you share the more about that Tokyo experience with us?
Yes, I also participate the Halloween in Tokyo, Shibuya, and also we have countdown events in Tokyo. I all participate in the organization of all the events. And what is difficult is that the many stakeholders have different requests. For example, they have a dictionary request. For example, the police want to have less people. That the restaurant or shops have more people because they earn money more and profitable. So the request contradiction is a very, very difficult problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a very hard things to communicate with different stakeholders. They have the sometimes opposite purposes. So adjustment of such request is a hard way. I always have some experiences.
I see.
Yeah, that's one of the source of the accent, I think. Yeah.
I
In crowd crashes, early detection and prevention is more important. If something occurred, the access to the crowd, engineering plus medical. Next slide, please. Also, this is an example. Biomechanical engineering plus medical study. Next slide, please. But I think there's a limitation of physics and modeling. Basically, not for human, but for particle, the study is particle and flow model study. So characteristics of human and environmental influence and human psychology, behavioral pattern based on human psychology is not appropriately influenced. Next slide, please. So this is last one. What we will do next. I want some formal name of our group. I think what will be the formal name of our group, and then we should decide task we can or we should perform, and sharing experience and knowledge, and then do small and important projects together. So and then let the world, especially policymakers, know the principle of results, and also research together.
2019, 3 years ago, and I saw the density of the crowd on that year, and I made a sort of a judgment not to walk down that street because it was just not fun anymore. It was too crowded. But thinking back when I saw that, I already saw that there was trouble 3 years ago. What else might have triggered this, though, is that the timing of the subway closing was 11:16 p.m. And I think it's not a coincidence that the disaster happened not too long before that, around 10:20, so approximately 1 hour before the closing of the subway, due to sort of automatically notify police that there are too many people here and we need to change the street to a one-way street. But maybe we could install a camera on places that might have a crowd, and when the crowd does become too many people, we could have some sort of artificial intelligence which would then send a notify the police, hey, there's too many people here, you need to come here and change this street to a one-way street.
Thank you very much. By the way, I feel very comfortable with the progress that we have made. For example, Norman is now engaged in the metaverse. I think it's good for the education and retraining. In fact, I already start some work with my team and about training and education, public education. Metaverse is very useful technology verse. So we have technology, and then we have the medical knowledge and experience. And also we have real experience and field experience and real cases. I think this is probably, let me say, is sort of destined mission and task. I'm very positive, much positiver than the beginning, the time.
Thank you.